Welcome to KAPS and Paradise 3.2, and we are at the Santa Rosa First Peoples Community. I'm delighted to be in the presence of Chief Ricardo Barrett Hernandez. Chief, first let me express my utmost admiration for the First Peoples and their close-knitted nature of living, and I've always been intrigued by the history of the First Peoples. So you're the best person to give me it from your perspective.
Okay, well, thanks so much for having me share with you a little bit about the history of the First Peoples. The history of the First Peoples as it relates to Trinidad and Tobago is a very long one, which I don't think we will have the time to go into all the details, but very quickly, as you would know, the First Peoples would have occupied Trinidad and by extension Tobago for the past 6,000 years. And this is based on the archaeologists and the anthropologists, their study and the human remains that have been unearthed in Trinidad. The most famous one, Banwari, the Banwari man, woman from the Southland. And based on that and the scientific dating of it, we can safely say that they have inhabited the space for, as I said, about 6,000 plus years. And the First Peoples would have come from the mainland of South America. They would have come, in our case, coming from Peru, coming Colombia, Venezuela, the Guyanas, and so on, and coming across to Trinidad. Now they came here very frequently because Trinidad was not another country for them. It was as their backyard, so to speak. So they would come here in their canoes, looking for new hunting ground, looking for a place to plant new crops and discovering, because they were discoverers. And of course, by coming so very frequently, some of them chose to settle. And the nations or the tribes that would have settled mostly were the Lokono, the Arawaks. They would have stayed in a community and built that community, whereas the Caribs or the Caribs, they were more nomadic and they would move more frequently from place to place. So that is basically the history until Columbus came. Well, as I said, there's much more in the history, but as we all know, the famous encounter with Columbus, when he came and he met the indigenous peoples occupying here. It was not until about 200 years after Columbus arrived that the Spanish authorities decided to set up shop in Trinidad, so to speak. And the first system that they introduced to the indigenous peoples were a system called encomiendas. The encomiendas were a type of governance where they would give a parcel of land to some Spanish noble or somebody who they considered did something great for Spain, and they would give that person a parcel of land. Now they could not only give the land, they have to give people now to work the land. And the only people that we had here were the Amerindians. So they would give a number of Amerindians to this landowner. And this was the encomienda system. They managed to capture a lot of the Amerindians and put them in the system. Not all of them went into the system. Some of them continued to live freely in the forest, roaming from place to place. And after the encomiendas were disbanded, or they failed for whatever reason, then they set out to set up what we call missions. Missions led by the Catholic Church, missionaries, and their main duty was to Christianize the Amerindians. So, in attempting to Christianize the Amerindians, they set them up in missions, and there were missions all over Trinidad. In the south, there were quite a few missions. Hyarima actually was the last mission, Spanish mission, Catholic mission to be established in the 1700s, 1750s. And that was short-lived. It survived for 30 years, and then the missionaries had to abandon it because they had two main problems. They met stiff resistance from the Amerindians who lived in this area, and then they had financial problems, so they had to abandon the mission. And then it was not until 1785-86 that a second attempt was made, and the mission in Hyarima was reopened, and the Amerindians from the three former encomiendas of Cora, Tacarigua and Arauca, which we call Aruca now, were brought to Hyarima. And that is how Hyarima started with these people. And today, the people who comprise the Santa Rosa First Peoples community are the descendants of those original inhabitants. and that is what the community is made up of.
And approximately how large is the community?
The community in Hyarima numbers maybe about 1,200, 1,200, there might be more. But people who would have identified themselves and who we could count and trace numbers about that, but there are a number of people who don't identify. So it could be more than that. That is in the Hyarima area as far as Santa Rosa is concerned. There are people of indigenous descent or First Peoples descent living in other parts of the country. Lopino, La Pastora, Tunapuna, Santa Cruz, Maraca, St. Joseph, and all these places. In the south, there are people of indigenous descent. And there were several indigenous nations or groups. For some reason, at some point in our history, the Spanish colonizers called all the indigenous peoples Caribs. And there was a reason for that. The Caribs were seen as the warrior class of the indigenous people. And they resisted the suppression of the colonizers. And they would fight back, and then they would keep moving and so on. So Spain gave a decree that the encomienda masters and the governors and the people of the country could have disciplined the Amerindians if they were resisting what Spain had to offer, conversion and Christianization and all that kind of thing. And in order for them to justify their treatment meted out to the indigenous peoples, they classed everybody as Caribs. So you had different nations. You had the Nipoyo nation, which is a mixture of two or more indigenous groups. You had the Chinese. You had the Caribs or the Caribs, the Loconos or the Arawaks. You had the Waraos, who mostly occupied the south, but they found their way into the other indigenous communities. And you had all these different nations in Trinidad, about 9 plus nations occupying Trinidad.
So Chief, on my way here, I passed by the statue of Hyarima. What is the folklore regarding this great warrior chief?
Okay, there is folklore and there is fact. The folklore is that Hyarima was one of the great Nipoyo warriors that escaped from one of the encomiendas. He was against the treatment that the Spanish authorities were putting upon his people, and he broke away from one of the encomiendas. We're not sure which one, and he sought to mobilize with other indigenous groups and other peoples in order to attack the Spaniards. It is said that on the 14th of October in the year 1737, or 1437 I think it is, I'm not sure about the date here now, but way back he attacked the town of St. Joseph and burnt it to the ground. And of course that was short-lived because of course the Spanish had more sophisticated weapons. He was captured and the rest is history and so on. So some people believe it to be a folk tale, a story or something like that. But there is evidence in the Dutch archives, and that was researched recently, that speaks of the uprising of the 14th of October. And the name Hyarima is mentioned there. Hyarima. Some people say Hyarima, which is the same person. So there is some evidence, some documented evidence to confirm that the uprising took place, and Hyarima was the main mover in that uprising. We also have a Carib queen who heads the community, but that Carib queen came into existence in the early 1800s. The community was always led by a chief, a male figure. But when the mission of Hyarima was established, they were put under the care and jurisdiction of the priest of the mission. And remember, before the mission, they were under in their villages, under the care of the chief. So the chief had full authority and responsibility, together with his elders, to lay out the village and to do everything that is necessary to run the village. When it was placed under the priest and the mission, the priest, in a way, usurped that authority that the chief had, because now the priest had the responsibility to lay out the village, to administer what is to be done, and to run the village and so on. So the focus of the chief shifted to the priest. Not only did the focus shift, but some of the cultural traditions shifted. In all the cultural things that the people at the time did, that started to wane. And a woman emerged with some leadership qualities. Her name was Dolores Medrano McDavid. And because of her leadership qualities, and she motivated the people at the time that they should not let all the traditions die, that they should continue with them. Because of her work and her role, she became the first Carib queen. And we had that tradition from then to today. Our current Carib queen is Mrs. Jennifer Casal. So we have the Carib queen, and you have myself as chief, and together we lead the community with the elders and so on. And that is our role.